Hello and welcome to the Integrated Rehab and Performance Golf Podcast. My name is Nick Curtis and I'm running the show here at the Integrated Rehab and Performance Center. So today we're going to talk about the pelvic rotation test. It's typically the second test we'll do right after the pelvic tilt test, and it's kind of a cousin of the pelvic tilt test. Again, we're looking for pretty subtle motion at the pelvis, and this one is much easier to kind of understand its importance because it's just rotating at the pelvis. If we think of a golf swing and we think of the pelvis, we understand how important it is to be able to rotate in the backswing and then rotate back to neutral and further through in the follow-through in the golf swing. Now, beyond being able to find the range of motion required here in this rotation, that's measured mostly in the lower quarter rotation test, where we're looking a lot at hip range of motion and tibial range of motion for rotation. This test is, the pelvic rotation test, is mostly about sequencing, timing, and kind of motor control. Now, there is some mobility aspects that this test will reveal. If you just can't even get subtle motion in there, it can be a mobility issue. But mostly here, we're looking to see if you have the kind of brain connection to specifically rotate through the hips, and it is essential that you do. This test, highly indicative of the kinematic sequence, right? So if you find a mobility issue, we'll work with that, and then we're going to retrain that motor control to get you to be able to use the correct muscles to rotate at the pelvis. And similar, we talked about this in the last podcast about why we do a test for biomechanics. If you're using swing drills to try and fix whatever it might be, and it's asking you to get in certain positions, this is definitely a test that we want to do, that if you can't do it for motor control or mobility issues, you're definitely going to be compensating to get into those, what seems like the correct positions, but all sorts of compensations will occur if you can't rotate about the pelvis like this efficiently. So, efficiency versus replication. Let's talk about that. So it isn't a goal to get any individual golfers to look like anyone on the PGA, because if you look at PGA golfers, a lot of them have some unique characteristics even between each other. There's a lot of variation in swings at that level, but they all do have one thing in common, and that's efficiency in their swing, right? So what we mean by efficiency here is that it's pretty much how is the golfer generating speed and transfer through the body. And for this, we mostly consider the kinematic sequence. So the kinematic sequence is what universally great ball strikers follow, or it's kind of the consistency between all great ball strikers. And that changes, or that stays the same regardless of the swing style that the golfer has, right? So there's some differences in there. Now, we won't go too much into the kinematic sequence today, but just to help demonstrate this, we have a diagram for it. So this is straight from the TPI, the kinematic sequence. If we look at this chart, we see that the red line is indicating the pelvis, the green, the thorax, blue, the arm, and then yellow, the club. So what this is showing here is that when these lines are below the zero line here, that means that we're rotating in a certain direction. In this case, that's the backswing. So we're rotating to the right, and when it's above the line, it means we're rotating to the left. So right here's the top of the backswing. This is setup, and here is the backswing. What do we notice? We notice that the pelvis doesn't rotate as far, but these all rotate in different magnitudes, right? So pelvis rotates a little bit in the backswing, then we have the thorax, the arms, and then the club. Now, when we get to the top of the backswing, we'll notice something really important, and it's hard to notice from these levels here, but we actually get initiation through the pelvis. So pelvis kind of comes first, then the thorax, then the arm, and then the club. And what that results in is that here, the pelvis peaks before the thorax. So the pelvis will actually stop rotating at increasing rates before the thorax does, right? So what this does is it kind of gives it like a piggyback or like a catapult, increasing speed of the thorax, and the thorax will start to slow down, which will allow some stretch shortening, and it kind of throws the arms into that swing direction, which increases the speed of the arms, which will then slow down and allow the club, which starts to slow down last, and here is impact, this impulse here, which increases the speed, the club speed, right? So this sequence of events, very precise, very important. One constant, consistent finding between golfers, even with different swing styles, is this sequencing. And you cannot get this dissociation if your pelvic rotation test is coming up that you don't have the motor control to do it, or you don't have the mobility to do it, right? And so let's take a look at what the pelvic rotation test actually is. We're looking at this golfer here, and we're demonstrating it. We're looking, we don't want this, right? So what we're testing here for really is dissociation between the upper body and lower body. And you see as he starts to move here, kind of the whole thorax came with it. So he rotated a little bit towards his left, and the hips shifted out towards his right to help do it. And the same thing, really trying to figure it out. It's just a strange thing for him to even think about rotating the pelvis without the thorax moving, or without bending at the knees, or finding other compensations for it. How can you rotate at the pelvis in a golf swing without rotating in the thorax if you can't do it here, right? And this is the importance of it. If you want to produce an efficient, reproducible swing every single time on the course, really hard to do. Well, you need the prerequisites first, and that's to even be able to dissociate your pelvis from your thorax, right? Really important that we noticed in the sequencing for us to be able to do that, right? So it's a subtle, it's a quick thing, but we need to be able to use our brain in a golf position and say, rotate at the pelvis, don't rotate anywhere else, because we need to initiate that downswing with the pelvis. It has to come first. Now, one thing we test for here, see, and I think that's actually a really interesting thing that he did there, is that he rotated, and that didn't look very well. A lot of things came with it, and then he's just working hard to figure it out. And then all of a sudden he gets that little extra, and that was more of a true pelvic rotation, right? He kind of rotated to some end range where his whole body was kind of rotating, and then he was just hanging out there trying to use different muscles, and then finally he figured it out, and he got a little bit more of that true pelvic rotation at the end, right? So really interesting to see, right? And still trying to figure it out, compensating a little bit, but got a little bit better as we move there. What we'll do here a lot of times is just create some stability. So what I'm going to do is I'll actually grab his shoulders, and I'll stabilize the upper body, and have him now without having to create his own stability, try and rotate the pelvis, and look at how much that cleaned up, right? So it does a lot better. So he has the mobility for it, that's for sure. He can do it. He just couldn't create the thorax stability to actually do it, right? And another golfer really just working through it, trying to figure it out. And again, look at the hip shift side to side, just not getting a lot of range of motion at all. So a surprising test to, it seems so simple, but a lot of golfers will struggle with it. And it may be that they cannot create that lower body dissociation and that kind of leading of the pelvis in the downswing due to biomechanics, due to the body restrictions, mobility, motor control, things that we can all fix in the weight room, right? So great benefits from testing for this and then addressing it. And so some ways in which we do address it, one here, very subtle drill, really important mobility actually, opener, getting some relative motion in the pelvis. It's great for a lot of things. And one thing is just retraining that individual, very specific pelvic rotation, where here we're pushing our knee down at 45 degrees, this 45-degree foam roller lower body roll. We're trying to keep our upper body stiff, and we're using the floor for support to kind of help us do that. And then we're just pushing our knee ever so slightly forward, and that is going to create a little rotation at the hip, right? So we're training that pattern in this way. We're kind of using constraints to help stabilize parts of the body and trying to get really subtle rotations through there and feel what that feels like to do that. And then on top of that, we're also opening up a lot of the structures in that pelvis and this actual bottom hip where we're getting some internal rotation, but that's for another day. Here, this 90-90 knee roll. Again, a lot of interesting cues here. What we're going to do is we're going to tuck our pelvis underneath us a little bit. We're going to dig our heels into the wall and kind of pull down on our feet, activating the hamstrings, and actually pull our sacrum off the ground. I did it right there just ever so slightly. So we're airborne a little bit in the tailbone and sacrum, but our belt line is still on the ground, our low back is flat on the ground, and we're tucked a little bit in that pelvis. And then from here, this position where we're holding it, holding ourselves up ever so slightly, keeping tension in the hamstrings. We're going to roll one knee forward and the other knee back. And so we're using our hips and our femurs here and all this hamstring activation to get rotation at the pelvis. Okay, so we're taking it up a notch. We're putting some tension requirements in there, some stability requirements in there, and retraining that pattern. We're learning how to get that pelvic rotation. Really important drill here. Now with this 90-90 scissor glide, again, we use the wall. We have our feet glued to the wall. That's how we're going to think about it. We never lose full contact on the wall. From here, we're 90 degrees at the ankles, knees, and hips. We're going to try to keep this in a nice straight line, stay tall through the spine. And then we're simply going to push our knee forward. We're stabilizing our hand here, helping to keep any rotation occur from anywhere above the pelvis. And then we're thinking about pulling our hip back. We're not using our lower back to pull our body back. We're thinking about using our hip to kind of pull our knee into our hip joint is a way to think about it. And then we rotate forward. So hear me demonstrating a bad rep where our whole body comes along with it and comes back with it. We don't want to do that. We want to keep everything stable up top. And then foot contact stays firm on the wall. We don't lose any contact anywhere with the foot. And that creates another constraint where we're getting pure pelvic rotation. And you'll even get a little burn in the glute holding that knee up like this as well. Right, so really great drill for retraining that pattern. Now with this drill, it looks the same, but it is a little bit different where we're going to, a few cues with this one is we're pulling our hip towards the wall at our feet. So we're going to create a little space underneath us here. We're actually also going to push our knee away from us. Right, so this is kind of the starting position. And then again, feet glued to the wall. Glued to the wall. We're going to get some glute max activation through here. So now we're taking it up a notch where we're going to actually use the muscles that control the pelvis. And we're going to start kind of fatiguing them and working them pretty hard. So it looks like a simple drill. You'd be surprised. Give it a try. You'll get a ton of burn. So what we're doing is we're pushing our hip down. We're pushing our knee and hip out away from us. And then we're going to lift it towards the opposite corner of the ceiling. And we're going to keep it there. So away and then up. And we don't want it. I'm demonstrating what we don't want. We don't want to pull it back. We want to push it away and up towards the opposite corner. That hip stays pushed down towards the wall at our feet. From here, we're getting a ton of glute activation. It's working hard. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring this knee to that knee. And now we're getting adductor activation. What this does is starting to groove some neural patterns where a lot of time, especially in rotational sports, we're using one glute max at the same time we're using the opposite side adductor and groin muscles. So really important as we start to train around the pelvis, getting activation of these muscles as they work in our sport, right? So when we're doing this, one last thing to remember is this knee never comes back as we're lifting this knee to this one. This one always stays out in front of this one. It always stays up, and that hip always stays pushed down. Great drill. Give it a try. Now for this one, glute foam roll, eccentric, is we're creating some space off the ground. That's why we're on an object here like the foam roller. We're pushing this knee past the bottom knee, and then from here, we're pushing this knee into the ground, and then we're opening up. We're using that bottom side glute really hard here to open our pelvis and our body up towards the ceiling, and then we slowly control that way down, pushing this hip away from us the whole time, keeping it as long as we can. And you'll notice that by the time we come down, it's still past that knee. That's just creating that stretch through there the whole time. And we can rotate as far as we can through our whole body there. And then we pull ourselves out of that position by pushing this knee into the ground. We keep that tension the entire time. We never lose tension there. Again, to get more details on these drills, you can go to the YouTube channel. I have all these up where I'm demonstrating and giving you all the cues and things you need. This drill, great, working that downside glute eccentrically and concentrically. So now we're getting rotation at the pelvis, but we're controlling it. We're controlling it as we lengthen the muscle, and we control it as we shorten the muscle. This drill, great mobility drill. This is lower body rolling. We're going to keep tension only in this leg, and we're going to try to relax everything else in the body. Okay, so what we do here is toes towards our nose, this knee stays straight, and we're just rolling. So we're going to start on our back. So I'll roll back here. Everything kind of follows in line. Upper body comes first, then lower back, then pelvis, and then I pull the knee across here. So this is actually our starting position right here. This knee stays straight. These toes stay pointing towards our nose. We roll with our hip. then our pelvis follows, and then our low back, mid back, upper back, and then our arm, right? So just like we talked about in the kinematic sequence where we want one thing at a time, here's kind of a mobility drill. You'd be surprised how effective this can be to help create the mobility in our system to move one segment at a time and kind of learn what that feels like. So again, the hip and the pelvis is rotating, then the low back. You want to feel one thing at a time. Low back comes, then mid back, then upper back. Again, a great drill. Here, pure hip mobility capsule work where we have a band pulling really hard. We're getting that band as high up in the groin as we can. A ton of tension through the band. You're going to be working really hard not to go flying in the direction the band is pulling you. And then what we do from here is we're going to kind of work on opening and closing the knee. We can even use our hand to help close, building in some internal rotation into the hip, and then let it open up. And we can work into different positions as we do this. Good. Great drill for just pure mobility of the hip, especially when the hip capsule is the issue. So something we like to prescribe for the golfers to help open up that hip, give you kind of the prerequisite hip mobility to start working on the motor control aspect. Again, a similar drill if you don't have a heavy band or just can't get in position is we're going to open our knee up to about 70 degrees, whatever's most comfortable for you. A little bit of a weighted kettlebell, and then foot stays flat. We actively pull this knee away from us using our glute on that side, and then we want to work into that position. So we're just going to shift forward into it, and then we shift backwards out of it. Don't let the knee come up. We don't want to come so far that the heel comes off the ground. Foot stays nice and flat. Pulling that knee and away from us, using our glute, using some weight, and then we're just shifting into that position, holding it for a breath, and then coming back out. So again, just a pure mobility drill again, giving us the prerequisites. Here we have a strengthening and motor control drill where we're working on lower body dissociation, just like before, where we're doing a side step up, and then we're going to keep our shoulders pretty much square to the wall in front of us, and we can even do this with a little bit of weight. So again, we're getting some pelvic rotation. This is great for training the downswing. We do this going both ways, and we can weight it up a little bit where we're doing a side step, and we're doing an aggressive step up and twist while our shoulders stay relatively straight, pointing towards the wall. So we're getting relative motion here at the pelvis. What we don't want to do is let the whole body come along, because then the hips are not doing much rotation there. Here they are. Now here they're doing much more rotation. So again, a strength drill we like to prescribe with our athletes as we start to get a better sense of that pelvic rotation, motor control, and mobility, and then starting to put it all together there. And so let's look at some data that TPI themselves have collected on this. So looking at amateurs pelvic mobility test, they had 19,000 participants here that were evaluated, and 50% had proper mobility passing the pelvic rotation test, which means 50% did not. In terms of people that did not, 35% had limitations in both directions, and then people who only had limited left rotation was 8%, and then limited right would be 7%. Now looking at PGA Tour, we had 74. They had 74 responses from PGA golfers. 67%, so a little bit better, were able to produce good mobility in the pelvic rotation, while 25% of the fails had it in both directions, and only a few had issues going left specifically or right specifically. And then again, we can look here at coordination. So 81% had good coordination. So when we kind of stabilize them or look at them, they were able to coordinate pretty well. And then others were not, where they had lateral movement and other issues in the rotation testing. So really interesting data to take a peek at here. So to conclude, today we looked at the pelvic rotation test, really important test to look at, especially when we're comparing it to the kinematic sequence and its significance in the kinematic sequence. If we want to create a reproducible, efficient golf swing, which we need to be able to do, we need to be able to dissociate our pelvis from our torso, and this is an important test to do to decide if that's something we actually can do. And if we can't, we have things that we can do to work on that, right? So great transfer into the golf game, where when we're in the gym working on these things, that we can actually take onto the practice range, and we can actually achieve these positions if it was a mobility issue without having to do a ton of compensations. And then we can actually achieve the integration into the timing and sequencing in the golf swing, especially with the initiation of the downswing in pelvic first, right? Pelvis first. So really important, has a lot of important indications to be able to perform the pelvic rotation test with satisfactory indications and patterns, right? So great test that we do. Lots of things that we can do to improve it, and really important implications in the golf swing. Thanks for listening.